Casey Purcell.
Jessica Vijay.
And I'm Andrew Pena.
Okay, so number one says, what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate, and why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart to be passionate and persistent? Well, I think a really big part of it was that he found God, or God found him, um, because I think that finding God really would change anybody around and make them realize things that other people don't think are important are important. Like throughout the movie, everybody else was thinking of the slaves as like subhuman. They weren't even human, and they weren't treated humanely. And I think that by finding God, he was able to recognize how wrong that is, and he pointed out multiple times that everybody is created equal.
Good, yeah, I agree. I think I didn't really see that there was any part that why he was really advocating for. I didn't see any part that he mentioned why he was advocating for slaves or for their cause. But I agree with you with that comment because I think that as he believed he knew that everyone should be created equally, and that they are humans and they shouldn't be treated that way. And so I think that is a big part too why he was advocating for that cause.
Yeah, I think because he also realized kind of the sanctity of life, and like by realizing that everybody is equal and everybody is a human, then obviously knowing that you can't just sit around and watch these people like be treated so badly.
I agree with what you guys said. Like, the one part that stuck out to me in the movie is after, I think it was after their parliament meeting or something. Um, Wilbur was playing cards or poker or whatever at the local bar, and the Duke of Clarence, the really short guy who was mean in the movie, he didn't have any more money, so he's like, well, we can use one of my slaves as in place of money. And Wilbur just like looked at him, put his cards down, and left. And I don't remember if it was after all the fighting and advocating he did for the slaves or before, but he knew that treating someone like that as use of money was not right, and everybody deserves to be treated with respect.
Yep, I thought that part was really interesting too, because like he was being used as a means of trade and in
Hmm.
place of money. And I can't even imagine how that would feel for somebody to just be like, oh, okay, well, do everything for me, and I'm going to treat you as less than dirt. Oh, and I might sell you at one of my poker games.
Yeah.
But that's cool. So, for somebody to realize that that's not okay is probably really liberating for the slaves, but not as liberating as, being free. So,
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was sad too at that point in the movie when he got up and I just the facial expression on the the I guess the slave when he came in, and I know it was just acting, but you could see like disappointment and sadness and you know in his eyes, and it just made me think like even though he was acting, it's just yeah, how would it feel? How would it be to be treated that way? And so I just kind of think that that's interesting. That I thought it was the whole thing was interesting because the whole movie is like I don't even know why. Like it doesn't even make sense to me why that would be a debate. Why would that would be a debate to um, in these political meetings on whether or not we should use slaves or not use slaves. And to me, that's just, I was just like, how could it even be a point of like question? It doesn't make sense to me. And so that's kind of sad that was kind of the direction some countries were headed, and it was just like, that's weird. So.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But I mean, of course, hindsight is 2020. But it's like the same thing with like women. We weren't allowed to vote for however long, and we were also treated as like property. Women couldn't own property, and they couldn't vote, and they couldn't do things by themselves. A man had to do it. And so now, of course, that seems stupid because women are just as capable of men in a lot of capacities. But it's just now looking back, it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that was ever a doubt that women were less than men. And then, of course, we don't realize until after that we were wrong and that we were being stupid. And so it's those kinds of things like slavery and women's rights. It's like, how was that even a question? But it was.
I just wanted to move on to the next part of that first question. It says, why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart to be passionate and persistent? And for me, I think as far as Wilbur's heart, it drove him. He was so passionate, so dedicated to that purpose. And I think for us as, to be a family advocate, we have to realize the danger, I guess the attack that's on families, and see how the nation right now is kind of, attacking families, or seeing how things are starting to change as far as accepting certain things like gay marriage, and how we need to have that same type of, I guess, heart, passion as Wilbur did, to be able to fight for the the cause of families, and what we stand for. So we need to have that same type of passion, same type of desire in our heart to realize that it's important, and it's more important than other policies that could be implemented. So I just wanted to answer that. I feel like that's what it takes to be able to stand up for that, for the family side of it.
Yeah, I mean, really, to stand up for anything, you have to be passionate, because if you're not passionate, then why bother? Because if you're not passionate, you're not going to, want to put in the effort that it's going to take to learn about it. Like, a lot of Wilbur's strength in his point of view was that he understood the other point of view. And so a lot of effort goes into not only being fully versed in what you are trying to say, but also what the other person is trying to say, because you got to be able to understand where they're coming from in order to work with it. And so if you're not passionate, then you're not going to really try. So it just seems pointless to try to do anything if you're not passionate about it. And I think that Wilbur also knew the consequences of not being an advocate for slaves, or for the freedom of slaves. And so by knowing the consequences of not doing anything, he gained passion from that as well, because he was able to realize that if he doesn't do something, then a lot worse is going to happen. And even though he's just one guy can totally be the difference. I mean, he started it, but then he wasn't one guy. He had all these other people helping him. So because of that, they were strong, because of the passion that he had from knowing that not acting would lead to worse consequences.
I like that throughout the entire movie, you see Wilbur, he's fighting for the rights of the slaves, and he's in poor health condition, and he's working both at working both to support the freedom of slaves, and he's um, not ignoring the fact that he's sick, but is working and taking medications to try to help and to support his health. And he's working night and day. He's going and telling people this is what's happening. And one of the parts of the movie that also stuck out to me the most is when he's trying to get supporters, like he's trying to show people like this is the conditions, like when they're on the boat, they have the party on the boat, and like they're taking a tour of the harbor, and they go and then they stop in front of the slave ship and they can smell everything, and Wilbur's like, this is the conditions, this is what's happening to these people that are being torn from their homes and taken away from their families, and they're not good conditions, and what you're doing, what with you getting slaves and treating them badly is even worse. Well, it's just as bad as what they've been through, and we're trying to say these are people too. They didn't ask for this. They were torn from their homes, their families, and put in this situation where they're treated like dirt, basically.
Yeah, I really like that you pointed out that they didn't ask for it, because I think that's a big part of it. Like, they had everything ripped away from them pretty much just because they could. And so, like, they didn't think about them at all, because they're taking them away from their family, and then they take them on this boat trip where a big chunk of them is going to die, and then they get to America, and then they die anyway, because, well, I mean, not America in the movie, but, I mean, sorry, they get wherever, and then they are sold, and then they are made to do everything that some white guy tells them to do. I mean, like, nobody would ever ask for that. That's not like a good deal in anybody's eyes. So, I mean, that right there should make anybody passionate. Just the fact that they were made to do something that they didn't want to do should make anybody passionate to get rid of it and absolve it.
I like that, just because I was just getting ready to ask that question. I was going to say, because we were talking about passionate and having a desire to advocate for something, and so my question was going to be, well, how do you get that passion? Because Wilbur kind of he was almost like he was born with it. He was born with the passion to treat everyone equally, but yet some other people weren't. Some other people didn't have that passion. I don't know the name of the one guy, but there's one guy at one point in the movie where he came into the meeting, and he came into one of their meetings, and he's like, well, I just wanted to hear the other side of the story, and then eventually, I think he was like the first one to sign a document to advocate for to abolish slavery or whatever what they're talking about. And I think you kind of answered the question there, is to be passionate. You kind of just like one thing was to see how other people be treated unequally like that, and just see someone be pushed around or bossed around just like that. That would be one way to become passionate about something. I just didn't know if you guys had like what other ways could be that can you have passion for
I think just to stop. I mean, I feel like for some of them, they were just being ignorant. They didn't understand what was really going on, and then they just kind of lived in their ignorance, and they were like, okay, well, if we don't really fully understand what's going on, then that's fine, that's better, then I don't have to get involved. And so it was just like ignorance is bliss, because they felt like they were able to remove themselves and therefore remove the issue, out of sight, out of mind. But then I feel like other people, you have to see them as not people in order to do that. Because if you're I mean, you're not going to do that to another human being. So the fact that they saw them as less than humans, and then when Wilbur took them on the tour of the slave boat, and then they were on the other boat, and they were like covering their faces because it smelled. And he was like, "No, take it down. I want you to smell this. I want you to remember how they are living." And then also when he made the box to fit into, I think just by showing other people the harsh reality, you're able to like plant that seed of knowing, oh gosh, is that really what's happening? And then, of course, it is. So when you figure that out, I think that you can be passionate about it too. Once you like have all the facts, so just like knowing about it and then doing the research on it or letting someone else teach you is going to be super helpful. I mean, you just gotta know and work towards that passion. But I also think that Wilbur he was almost over the top in some of the things that he did, but when he was being over the top, he made these huge differences, like the scroll going down the whole aisle. Like, that's so dramatic, but it makes such an impression. And so by being over the top, he was making people look at him. He was making them listen. And so you can't, and even when he was being totally ignored in that parliament meeting, he still kept talking, even though nobody else was caring at all that he was even there. And so you just have to keep going. And I think that I mean, if you don't start out with passion, you're going to get passion from just the things that you do while advocating for whatever you're advocating for.
Yeah, you kind of went there to number 3. How did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share their research? What evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence? And you talked about that. You just kind of mentioned that they to kind of create passion through, I guess, through your research and through presentations, I guess, through your presentation of the advocating for it. And they used like that box there, and I think in one of the very first meetings they had, and they showed they put one guy put on like the chains around his neck and chains around his arms and stuff to kind of show what it was like to be chained up and chained around like that. And it's like, yeah, people would just like, could you imagine just putting those on and in a sense almost like being a slave for an hour? Could you imagine what it would be like to be treated like that? And so their presentations, their research, some of the things that they did, I think, were really, really blunt and some of the things over the top, like you said. And I think you need to do that in order to have an impact on other people to really see your point of view.
Yeah, especially when it's something that big where it's affecting so many people. Because if you're not big and memorable, then they're just going to brush you off and put you to the side. And they also, I mean, as far as sharing their research, the fact that he had so many people helping him was so crucial because he couldn't have done all of that himself. I mean, he went one way and then like 4 other guys went 4 different ways and then they all got their own information, but like to share their research was when he did the chains and when he popped out of that box and when like they actually went on the slave trade boats. And so like you can't deny facts. You can't deny that someone went on this boat, saw all these conditions. So I mean, by having all that research, you're like that you personally did, that's going to add so much value to what you're saying because you actually went there. You're not just saying, oh, well, I heard that the boats are pretty gross. So you actually went there and you saw everything and you smelled everything and you heard everything. So it just adds so much credibility to you. And as far as trying to persuade those on the opposing fence was sharing that research. And I mean, he also talked to like others. He talked to slaves and he talked to some doctors, and he wrote all those papers and he shared it in Parliament. So I mean, they did a lot. They did a ton, and because they did that much, I mean, they just never quit. So that's a big part of why they were able to accomplish things is because they tried so hard together. Do we want to go backwards to number 2?
Yeah, we can. I didn't know how to answer the question. I didn't really answer that one, but yeah, we can. If you guys kind of have some ideas of that.
Okay, so how did Wilbur employ a theoretical approach to become a more effective advocate? Um, so from the microsystem, I talked about how he was like feeding beggars and other people that came to his home, and, and he was concerned about the effect that he had on his home, and he wanted to be a good dad and he wanted to be a good father. And then for the Mesa system, I said, or Jessica, do you want to jump in?
Um, what did I write? I'm sorry, I'm looking at this. For the missile system, he kind of worked around the microsystem as well. Like, he went and, like you said, he was feeding people who needed help. He really didn't turn people away. Like the one part of the movie where he asked his cook, and he's like, "I just eat a couple of this, made for dinner," and she storms out of the room crying, and he's like, "What did I do?" And then the older gentleman, he's like, he took him to the kitchen. It's like, oh, he didn't realize that so many people had heard of his, contributions. Like, I'm willing to help, and it's like she hasn't sat down all day. She's been on her feet. But in the end, they did have something for dinner for his small group of people getting together. But the way that he, worked around his family and peers, they supported him, and he found those who were willing to support the rights of the slaves and make sure that they weren't treated harshly, that they were treated as people and they got their freedom.
Yep. For Mesa system, I also had like him sending out writings,
Mm-hmm.
and then when he was talking to his wife, and then she was talking about how when she was 14, she stopped using sugar in her tea because it literally had a drop of slave blood in like every sugar cube or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that was another one that I had. For the exosystem, I talked about how he was opposing views in the parliament. And then, like, the economy of England, because one of the biggest arguments that needed to be talked about was what the economy would be if they abolished slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I just brought up that he wanted his friends and families to understand a lot. But the slaves, they're people too, that they shouldn't be treated as nothing. That what they probably should have done is like, what would you have done if you were taken from your home and brought to a totally different country and put in a situation where someone is treating you as like, you need to go do this, you need to go do that, and they're going to beat you, they're going to disgrace you, they're going to do all these different things to you because you are seen as less than them. And I think if that would have opened their eyes, it's like, how would you like to be treated as nothing for all your life and to be taken out of somewhere that you know and brought somewhere that you don't know so well and put to work until you die, until you until you die. There we go.
yep. What did you think for macro? Macro.
Um, I guess like near the end you can see a lot more people were coming in and they were fighting for the rights of the slaves. They were fighting for the abolishment of slavery. And he really didn't back down really. He took a period of time off for his health. So that's why I was assuming he was with his brother or brother-in-law, and but he went back after meeting his wife, that he went back and he did all that he could to support the rights and to abolish slavery at the time, and brought some of the people that fought with him in the beginning to fight even harder. And then they ended up winning.
Yeah, I also talked about like how about religion, because that was in the movie a lot, but because he talked about how God found him, and then economics as well, because they tried to. There's that where they tried to secretly get rid of slavery by saying that like every American ship could be subject to search and seizure. And then I also talked about their idea of America, because with the war in America, they got an idea of what revolution was and what it would cost monetarily as well as emotionally and culturally, and that they also saw that slavery isn't okay just because they're black and therefore less than us. And then for the chrono system, I also talked about the American War, because it's going outside, and it was the whole, like, everything. They were talking about how they were looking at them as an example and then changing their views based off what they saw. And then also just how it all kind of worked together, how all those systems, it all starts off as just one thing, but then it all builds up and becomes this big advocation. And yeah. Did you want to add anything for Chrono System or move on?
We can move on, that's fine.
Okay. So, number 4, how does the film portray the importance of working together as a group, and what has family advocacy group work taught you? I think we kind of touched earlier on how you can accomplish so much more together, since Wilbur was just one man and he couldn't do all of what needed to be done by himself, so you can get a lot more done when you're with other people. And when you're with other people too, you get like multiple points of views and perspectives, and so that just having multiple like insights and ideas can make you stronger because you're more informed. So I think that's helpful. Plus, bigger groups are just better for the cause anyway, because, like, yeah, one person matters, certainly, but a group is going to be more effective.
This reminded me of, I guess, this movie, and then we also watched what else did we watch? Or we read the book that, what was it called? The Sacred Duty, right? Yeah, and then the book. They're both similar, you know. They were both fighting for a cause, and it was mostly like a smaller group or just themselves of, you know, what they believed, and it was started small, but just by being persistent, being passionate about something and believing in it, being vocal, standing up for it, eventually they both had an impact on both their subjects. And I think that's kind of similar, you know, both stories are similar here. And what I wrote down is during controversial subjects, it is very difficult to come to a conclusion on something you are passionate about. When something like this, you can see obviously there's a lot of fighting between both groups, and we see that today with gay marriage. or traditional marriage, there's big groups fighting for a certain cause and what's right and what's not right. And then I also put up a family advocacy group has taught me that it is important to stand up for what you believe and be vocal. Even if you feel like you won't have an impact, you need to be willing to stand up for what you believe, especially when you know it is right. And so I think that's what they did, is that they knew that that was something that was right and something that needed to be stood up for and taught and explained and shared, to have passion for. And even though they had a smaller group, they found people to help advocate for with them and their cause. And like you said, as you create I think a base of a group, it's a lot more powerful. You have more words, more voice of people. But it is hard if you don't have very many people to begin with. Then you're kind of on your own to try and build that base,
Yeah, I didn't even I didn't even think about a sacred duty at all. So, but when you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, totally. It's like practically the same story. I mean, even in the book, once he got all those people, he was a lot stronger. And same thing in the movie. And when, like, there was a point where Wilbur kind of was just done. But then his, like, group members or whatever, and they were like, no, you can't be done. And the same thing happened in the book, I think. I can't remember. I'm, like, too focused on the movie. But it's just, like, the same thing where once you have a group, you can't just quit because they need you. So, I mean, especially if you're the one, like, starting it, then, because obviously you're extremely important in that. But it's also just easier with more people because, I don't know, for so many reasons. You can get more done. You make a bigger impression when you've got more because it's like, oh, this many people. I mean, like, when people try to, like, they make petitions and stuff and they want you to sign them. By getting however many, you're showing others that this many people care, and we weren't even able to obviously go all around the world, but here is this list of people who disagree with everything that you're saying. So, I mean, like, as far as the second part to the question goes, the first part, the importance of working together as a group is that you get so much support, like, emotionally and physically, because they're doing it with you. So you've got this emotional support because they understand everything that you're going through because they're going through it too. So they're not going to let you quit.
Something that I put for the importance of working as a group. I don't remember how to say his name, but he was the slave that they had working with them and to support him. And what I saw change in Wilbur, like, he was, willing to help them and give them support that they needed. But as soon as I think his last name was Enquino or something, he showed him the branding on his chest. He's like, this was my mark to show that he owned me now. I was no longer a free person. And going through, like, hearing that Wilbur, just his whole demeanor had changed completely, that I could see in his face. He's like, these people have their lives are just, like, taken from them, and knowing that and having the different ideas that each people brings into the group and having his thoughts and his feelings towards it made their advocacy for the freedom of slaves even stronger because they had a first-hand account with them of the way that they've been treated.
Yep, I totally agree. Okay, so what has family advocacy group work taught you?
That everyone... oh, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. That that every person matters. Even, like, when you're in a group, you're relying on other people to do their part. I mean, this works just as well in like a group project. If you've got this group project and you've got 5 people and you've got 5 things that need to be done and you're assigned your part, you have to be totally safe in the thought that the other people are going to do their part. So that it's the same thing in advocacy, especially back then when you couldn't just Google something.
Yeah.
Because you have to, one person's doing one thing and another person's doing another thing. So you got to trust that they're all as dedicated as you. Otherwise, there's going to be like a really good part of the project and there's going to be a really bad part of the project or the advocacy that you're doing. It also taught me that you have to, and like just from the course overall, that you have to be passionate about it and you have to want to make a difference, because if you're not like wanting to make a difference, then you could be anybody just making no difference at all. So you have to be like in it to win it, I guess, and know that you're gonna face hardships and that sometimes you're gonna find people, I mean most of the time you're gonna be finding people who don't agree with you. So you have to be super well prepared, otherwise you're just gonna get torn apart.
One of the things that, kind of going back to one of the other questions too, we had talked about it earlier, but understanding the other points of view, I think, as far as what I learned from this family advocacy group. And what was the other question? It was earlier. It said, I don't remember what it was that we were talking about, but to be passionate about. How we can be passionate, but understanding other points of view too. Not just being so focused on, we understand why we believe a certain way, and we understand why we're passionate about it, but we need to also understand the other points of view, because the better we understand the other point of view, we can see the types of questions they have about our view. We can see why they disagree with our view. They can see a whole different side of the story that we can better defend our cause. And so I think that helps us to be more passionate too, if you understand both sides of the issue and not just say, well, I don't agree with slavery and I don't agree with gay marriage, so I'm not even going to know what their concerns are. I don't care about it. But no, I think we need to understand their points of view, because they feel just as passionate about their side as we feel passionate about ours. And I think that understanding their view and why they're passionate about it, we can better help other people understand our points of view, and to hopefully become advocates also. Switching to a side is being able to help them understand our points of view. So understanding the other points of view, I think, is what I've learned from.
Yep, I think that is just as important as understanding what you're saying, if not more important, because if you don't understand where they're coming from, you're not going to make good arguments. Because if they're, okay, I don't know, I can't even think of an example, but if they're talking about one thing and you're talking about another thing, and then they ask you a question, if you respond with something that's totally not, like, you're not addressing their concerns. So if you're not prepared to do that, then you could ruin everything right there, because they're just going to be like, oh, well, they didn't know what they were talking about and they didn't answer any of our questions. I mean, that it would be like going into a job interview and they're like, what's your job experience? And you're like, oh, well, I have a dog at home and I also have a little sister. And they're like, okay, but what's your job experience? And they're like, yep, my dog is 3, my sister is 20. You make yourself look dumb by not understanding what they're trying to say. So I think I totally agree with you. I think that understanding just as much what you're saying as what they're saying, because I think that's totally crucial. Do we want to move on to the next question?
Mhm.
Okay, hold on, I lost it. There it is. Okay. Number 5. What parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in Alma 46? And okay, there's 3 questions for this one, so let's just start with that one. What parallels do you see?
Um, Between Wilbur and Captain Moroni, I went through and I just read the part that Captain Moroni rips and he starts writing the different things that he's fighting for. And one of them that stuck out to me is Wilbur and him are both fighting for freedom, whether it's freedom of religion or freedom of rights of people. That they both just want to stop the mistreatment of individuals. Um, they want to make sure that everyone is treated equally. They wanted to make sure everybody's treated the same, and no one should be treated differently because of the color of their skin.
I like that. I put that they were both fighting to defend what they were standing for, but I didn't think that they were both fighting for a form of freedom. That's good. Um, I also talked about how they were doing it because of religion. I mean, obviously, Moroni is doing it for religion, but I think Wilbur, when he was talking about how God found him, um, and like I mentioned earlier, I feel like once you have, um, like, what am I trying to say? Like God's principles in your mind, like everybody is equal. Once you have that in your mind, it's so hard to just sit back and watch other people who are equal to you being brought down so far. Um, and they both, I mean, they were both rallying people together for their cause, and they both knew something was wrong and they're trying to fix it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one is similar to what we've been already kind of been talking about, as far as the parallels between Wilbur and Captain Moroni. I'll just go with the passion part again. I think as far as another parallel, Wilbur was really passionate with his belief, and obviously Moroni was too. They're both so passionate about it that it drove them to rally around and try to get people together to help advocate for him.
Totally. I mean, Moroni like ripped his clothes off. If that's not passion, I don't know what is. So, I mean, I don't think I could ever get that passionate about something. But I mean, just I totally agree. They both had the passion that made them stand out. I mean, they were both also that kind of theatrical, over the top. Um, as far as ripping your clothes off is not exactly the most normal thing, so that's pretty over the top too. Okay, so what is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? Well, he never, I mean, Christian and professional family advocates, you're not gonna, I mean, we talked about, like earlier in the semester, we talked about using religion as like the backbone. Do you remember those videos where um, the one, it was like about gay marriage, and the one guy was like super bashing on gay people, and he was like, it's wrong, God says it's wrong, you're all damned, you're all going to hell. And then the other guy who was for gay marriage was super professional and um, like calm, and he had facts and stuff like that. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, the guy for gay marriage was more professional than the other one. And as far as Christian advocate, just being like a disciple of Christ and knowing that what you're saying affects others. And so I think Wilbur really did that by using his facts instead of religion, even though I think religion was part of what pushed him to be an advocate in the first place. But he also like trusted the people he was with, and he was loyal to them, and he never like put people down. Like he never tried to make himself look better by making other people look bad. So I think Wilbur definitely exemplified a Christian and professional family advocate. I mean, sometimes he was also using like humor, but he was always respectful in his humor. So, I mean, that makes you professional, and you're also a Christian advocate too. So,
What makes me think is thinking back to the Book of Sacred Duty of Brother Wilkins. I think it's the one who was going out to the NGM conference in Istanbul, and how he maintained a professionalism while he was speaking, but also brought in the values from the church and taught people the the principles in a way that didn't sound preachy. He didn't try to, this is what I believe and push down their throat. He did it in a professional manner. He did the studies and everything he needed to do, and when it came needed, he brought out the proclamation.
yep, you you can you can use religion in it, but don't make that like
Don't make it your basis.
yeah, don't make it your whole backbone for your idea, because other people don't aren't going to respect that point of view as much as others may. Okay, so the last question for this is, how can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices? I mean, just be a good example, work hard, be hopeful, use love and charity rather than like hate and selfishness. And you got to have courage, obviously, because you're going to be standing up against people that are loud and often degrading. So, I mean, also, you just focus on what you can change, because if you get caught up in the big picture, and then you're going to feel like super helpless and like you're not going to be able to make a difference. But if you focus on what you can change, I think that'll be a lot more helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna say, along with what you said just before, is how can we be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices? But using facts, I think, not being solely focused on, especially in group settings or political settings, not. You were talking about those videos with the one supporting others, but one was a lot more effective because he used facts, he used stories, he used experiences, so not focus so much on the will of God so much, because I don't think it doesn't really stick, I guess, to people or community or the society, I guess, as it does for people individually. And so we need to use facts, and we need to use stories. We need to use, reasons that impact society rather than just people individually.
Yep, totally. Okay, do we want to add more or just move on?
Well, I kind of think that almost went to the next one. Marcia Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas? Just kind of what we were just talking about, what you mentioned about those presentations, and kind of just what I talked about a little bit, kind of goes into that same purpose. And in order to be effective in our speaking and presenting our passion for those for what we're standing up for, in those two presentations we saw, and I don't remember the names, but you just talked about them, and one was more effective because he used stories, he used personal experiences, and the other one was just strict, this is the will of God, and all of you guys will be, going to hell if you don't do what God says. And the one way is not the way to do it, and the other one is a good way to do it in a political setting. And like I said, it's different individually, because if you're talking to someone individually about someone that believes similar to you, or even if they don't believe similar to you but have a Christian or background, then it has a different impact. And so, yeah, did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas? I think exactly what we've kind of talked about before is, I mean, they were persuasive in their speaking, but I think the big thing was their presentations. They brought the presentations, and they were bold in how they presented their what they were standing up for, and that created, in my mind, a very persuasive and powerful thing to internalize it for other people and not just themselves. And so it kind of brought personal stories into people. And this is wrong. It's wrong to have people chained up and to force them around and to tell them to do things for you and sell them and have them be So I think that it led right into that. They did. Wilbur and his group did exactly what Marcia Barlow talked about in persuasive speaking.
Yeah, and they also did. She talked about reframing, and they did that because they all had this one idea of slavery, but then they totally reframed that and showed that slavery was bad and how it affects other people and not just the slaves. Then they also, the passion and the stories, they're motivating. It makes you want to get involved. And then also staying focused on what you're talking about. And
I felt like.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
The last thing that I had was they used the story of me and the story of us, because they all had their own opinions, but then they showed that it affected everybody. So they spent time trying to get people to relate, and that makes them sound better because they're doing so much to relate it to other people. Go ahead, Jessica.
The way that I felt like they did their speaking and writing is they shared stories, experiences, Inquanios experiences. And, he wrote a book, and, it shows a part of the movie where everybody just wants this book, and there's only so many copies that are left or that were printed, and, he's just signing and throwing. It's like people want to hear these stories. They want to hear, they understand, and they know, these people aren't being treated right. What can I do to change? And me, by buying this book, is supporting them, is, I reaching out and I'm trying to understand and learn about the other side of the story, and they're not just sticking to one side. And I wrote something like, I would even say that the opposing members that were, let's keep slavery, let's do this, sometimes it made the opposing team or opposing side would make things up in the movie, but they still stood strong in what they believed in, and they didn't let those small things back them down from trying to achieve their goal that they had.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, anything else to add on this one or move on?
We can move on.
What role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? Did you see their political system being pro-family? Why or why not? Well, as far as government goes, they were talking about the government was a huge part of it because they're the one who's going to pass the policy or the law to abolish slavery. So, that's a big part of government. And policy, the current policies that they had, it stopped the abolition of the slave trade, so they weren't able to do it because of the policies that were already in place. and religious freedom, um, his own religious beliefs helped him be pushed in the right direction, to know that what was happening was wrong. And that, I think, I mean, like I said earlier, I think that the religion played a big part in his deciding to advocate for it.
I agree with just what you said with his religion having a big reason to how he advocates for it. And to answer this, I think is kind of a hard question because when you first start watching the video, I didn't feel like it was gonna go very well, right? I didn't think that him fighting for slavery was gonna, go positive, and it took many years, many years that he felt like a failure because nothing had happened. He had, wrote a whole bunch of, he did a whole bunch of presentations and a lot of talking to those meetings and presenting to those people, and he felt like he was going nowhere with it. And so it's kind of hard for me to say because as far as that group there, it didn't look like they would have been pro-family. Didn't even look like they were going to agree with Wilbur on his decisions or on his presentation of abolishing slavery or getting rid of it. And then, so I guess to answer the question is, it doesn't look like they would have been, but in order for it to have any type of impact, you need to be willing to stand up for it, and someone needs to stand up for it and present the other side of this, present the other side of the problem. And that's what Wilbur did. And he stood up, and he fought, he decided to, advocate for that side of the cause. And so it's the same way with us, and I guess as far as our advocating, it may look really kind of grim. There's not really any chance for traditional marriage to stay and be enforced, and we just need people to be passionate and be willing to stand up for it, even though it doesn't seem like it'll ever go, I guess, positive for us. I don't know if any of that made any sense, but it doesn't, you're always going against the odds, but that doesn't mean you quit. It doesn't mean you give up. You got to keep doing what you believe is right and fighting for what you believe is right, and then you will be able to change the outcome by sticking up for what you believe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Honestly.
Yeah, okay.
And I definitely agree with you. I think that they were sort of pro-family and then sort of anti-family, because, I mean, if you're white, yeah, they're totally pro-family. But if you were a slave, viewed as property, and not as a human, then they're really anti-family because they took them away from their families, and then it's not like they're going to be allowed to communicate, and even if they could, how would that even occur, So it just was kind of dependent on the color of your skin if they were going to be pro-family or anti-family. But adding on to the first question, even though the current policies stopped the abolition of the slave trade, they found that loophole, and that allowed them to move forward. So that's more about the policy, and then more on the government was that the other governments had an effect on their government, like how America was doing things. They were looking to that and kind of seeing how that was working, and then that made an effect on their government as well. But he also, for religious freedom, he got, I feel like they had to have help from God throughout the movie. Because, I mean, there's times where he wanted to quit, but, I mean, yes, his friends helped him, but I feel like God was part of that too, being like, don't give up. You're helpful. You matter, you know? So, yeah. Anything else to add for what role the government policy and religious freedom played? Okay. Number 8. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well? And how did you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of? I think he used his time on Earth well. I mean, he fought for what he knew was right. He had a family. He was a man of God. I mean, do you guys think he used his time on Earth well?
I do. I think that kind of going with the two, using his time on his earth well, and then the elements of consecration. You know, when I think of consecration and really devoting your time and your effort, your heart, you know, everything, literally everything that you have to a purpose. And in the sense of consecrating our will to God is consecrating everything to Him, and fighting for what's right and standing up for what's right. You know, Wilbur did that. He literally consecrated all of his effort and pretty much his entire life in that one point in slavery, and one thing that was good. And it took, I don't know if it ever mentioned how many years it took or how long it was, but at one point it said 15 years earlier in the movie, I think. So, I mean, he spent 15 years at least, you know, advocating, fighting for a cause. And I just with that last comment, I just think to myself, is there something that I have given that much time and effort in trying to fight for and stand up for something that I believed is right? I believe those things are good, but have I taken the time to go and literally consecrate my effort to stand up for it and do it to the extent that Wilbur did? And so, yeah, I think that he did use his time on Earth well, because he was literally consecrated and immersed in that cause. And so the kind of question is for myself is what can I do to immerse myself in something that is good?
Yeah. I listed the elements of consecration that I felt that Wilbur used. I mean, Elder Christofferson talked about work and service, integrity, respect for your body, constant exertion, and then productive leisure time. So that I feel like throughout the movie, that's what I saw Wilbur like living and doing. Because I mean, Elder Christofferson talked about how we have to, like, you have to really throw yourself into the work, and I mean, Wilbur definitely did that. So, and then he also he had integrity, obviously, and then respect for your body. He was sick, and so he knew that he needed to kind of take it easy, because you only get one body, so he knew he had to take it easy if he wanted to continue. I mean, that was probably so hard after spending so many years on something and then being super sick and having to admit that if you're going to make a difference later, you need to slow down now, otherwise you're going to die before you can do anything.
But I think that Wilbur spent his time on Earth really well because he fought for the rights of the slaves. Later in life, you know, he finally found his fiancée, his wife, and then he became a father, like he hoped that would happen. what seemed as he took care of his wife and he took care of his children as well as fighting for the rights of the slaves. And he consecrated his life to service. He wanted to make sure that everybody was treated equally, that nobody was treated differently, and he wanted to make sure that people knew that these slaves, that they were humans, that they had lives before this, that they didn't want this, and then in the end they finally got what they wanted, and it started making a change of effects with everybody, and things slowly started changing in their time.
Yep, I agree. Okay, number 9. All right, we're on number 9 with a half hour left, or a little under a half hour. So.
Did we start at what time did we? I thought we started at about 8.
We started at 8:19.
8:19.
Yeah,
So,
I set a timer so that we would know.
Oh, okay. What are we at? So we've got
An hour and 5 minutes. So we got 25 minutes left.
Okay. I've
so-
got to go. I've got to go at like 9:40. So I mean, 8 of what would that be, like 8? That'd be like 80 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other? Sorry, what?
I was just gonna say, if we could, we'll cut it a little bit short if that's okay with you guys. But I'll email her. I'll post the link and then I'll email her and tell her sorry, it's my fault. I had to go early, kind of cut it off, and tell her to give you guys full credit because of my schedule wasn't able to. And we kind of started a little bit late, but I'll mention it and I think it'll be okay. But I'll email her and let her know it was only 80 minutes.
It'll be super close anyway, so it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy?
I like the line from the movie when he went to go see his old preacher or whatever he was. He's like, be in the world but not of it. And when I heard it, I'm like, I know that. Like, we say that all the time within the church, and it's, you can do everything that you need to do in the world, but you don't have to be like everybody else. You don't have to be in it. You don't have to have the fanciest things or the nicest things. As long as you know what you're doing is right, good things will come of it.
Yep. I was thinking about how you have to stand up for what you know is right, even if you're standing alone. I mean, we know that, but it's so evident in the movie that he was dedicated to his cause, and even in the beginning when it was just himself, he still stood up for what was right. I mean, going back to that card game where that nasty little duke was like trying to trade his slave for the poker game. He was alone then, and he could have let the game go, and then if he won, just like not taking the slave or something. But I mean, he chose not to. He chose to literally stand up and walk out of the room. Mm-hmm. And sometimes silence says a lot more than actual words. And I think by standing up and just walking out of the room, it shows that he's not going to literally stand for what he knows is wrong. I mean, I have a friend who her dad said that when she was little, she would literally stand up and leave the room if the family was fighting and she felt the spirit leave the room. So, I mean, I feel like it's kind of the same thing. I mean, he saw that the game was taking a turn for the worse and that humans were being used as currency, and he just stood up and left the room and didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. And by not saying anything, he's saying that I'm not even going to get into a discussion with you right now. If you don't see for yourself that using another human being as a form of currency is not okay, then nothing that I say to you is going to matter, because the fact that it's even a thought in your head that that would be acceptable says enough that I'm not going to be able to get through to you. So, I mean, you just have to know. I mean, sometimes silence is better because it could have turned into like a total argument. And I mean, if it does that, then you're losing credibility because people aren't going to want to talk to you if you're like dissolving into fights when you are talking to people who don't agree with you, you know?
I really agree. I thought that was a good point because so I put down here. I said actions speak louder than words, and obviously they acted and how they presented and stuff and what they did. But I kind of thought that point right there with what you said was, he got up and he walked out. He just didn't have anything to say. He just, you know. I mean, what? I guess in that type of circumstance, what do you say?
Yeah.
And you can sit there and try and argue with them and say something, but you just, you know what? I'm done. It's just stand up, walk away, and people will understand where you're coming from just with that, just with doing just that, walking out.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you don't have to say anything because I mean, it's like you said. What can you even say?
Hold on
So,
one second.
what do you think about that, Jessica?
That actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just the actions that you do, like you mentioned, him simply getting up and leaving made the biggest difference. And his friend followed him. It's like, what? I was like, I'm not going to do this. You know, this is a person. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, if you're upset, you're going to say something that really wasn't meant to be said. But if you quietly get up and leave, those actions that you did instead of sitting there and fighting with the person verbally, it shows that you're going to be a bigger person and that you are simply just going to remove yourself from the situation for a little bit and then come back and then display your feelings to them.
Yep. I definitely agree. I feel like I mean, like you mentioned arguing. You might say something that you don't mean. I definitely agree with that because if you like, that's such a crucial moment. Like, if he had chosen to sit down and get into a fight, then I mean, I feel like other people would just look back on that moment and be like, oh well, he could like burst into yelling at us for like no reason at any time. So by just getting up and walking out, he's making a bigger statement than if he had stayed to fight about it. I also like other stuff from the movie that's related to child and family advocacy was having the courage and having the passion, not really using religion, having other people help you, and then we also talked a little bit earlier about not belittling other beliefs just to prove that you're right, and I think that is really important because just because you disagree doesn't mean that their point of view isn't valid for them. Just because it's absolute crap to you doesn't mean that they think so. I mean, obviously, Andrew, you mentioned earlier that they believe just as strongly as you do about yours. It's just the exact opposite. So you can't just be like, "Oh, you're wrong. You're totally wrong," and you're so stupid because you can't see that you're wrong, and I'm smarter than you because I can see that I'm right. Like, doing that is just, if you did that, total disaster. You're done. Like, nobody is ever going to listen to you again because they're just going to feel like you're going to attack them. So, I mean, you have to have the courage and the passion to speak up, but you also have the courage to accept and respect that other people have different points of views, and they're not always going to agree with you.
I just wanted to say one thing was too is, you know, it's so much different being able to have these conversations with someone that have the same beliefs. You know, like us, we can talk about it, we can agree with it, um, we can agree with it, and it's easier to talk about. But once you have someone that disagrees and brings up just a slight little question, it's I don't know, it's kind of, it takes you back because you're like, I don't know what to say next. Because
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of scary, and I think a big part of it is being able to express our views, express our beliefs, express our reasons, and have a good understanding. So not understanding both sides of the issues, being knowledgeable in our own issue, but then being able to understand how to use words, because that's something I'm not very good at. I don't really know how to express myself, especially to someone that disagrees with me, and being able to show them, teach them, and share with them why I think it's better than the other side of you. That I think is hard, and it takes talent to be able to to I guess advocate for, to teach someone else your purpose or your reason. So yeah.
I think um, I think a big part of that is you want them to listen to you, so you need to listen to them. And I think that knowing what to say comes easier when you have answers to their questions. Because if you load yourself up on the facts, then and do your research and all that stuff, then when they come to you and they ask you questions and you answer them, you know what to say because you've got all these facts in your head. So, I mean, I think that helps, but also I think having that passion helps you know what to say too, because I don't know, I feel like when you're passionate about something, you don't even have to try. You don't have to try. It just comes effortlessly. It just spills out of your mouth because you're passionate about it. So I think that helps too. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Number 10, what was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has that changed? Well, I think the biggest thing that changed for me was that in the beginning I was thinking one person really can't make much of a difference. I mean, there's 7.5 billion people in this world, and you think that one person is going to make a difference, but then throughout the semester, it that totally took a 180, and I realized that one person is all it takes, because one person starts and gets the ball rolling, and then everybody else joins in, and then the group can make the bigger difference. There's What movie is it? Oh, it's the Lorax, and he says something like, if someone like you care, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, it's not going to get better. It's not. So one person is a huge difference, and so that is probably the biggest thing that made the biggest impact on my life, because I started thinking the complete opposite, and then now it's totally different from what I believed 12 weeks ago or whatever.
I agree with what you said. It's one person can make a big difference, and it doesn't need to be a group of 12 people. It can be that one person making one simple change that can affect everybody else in that group.
Yeah.
Or within a family or anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said. I think that that one person can make a huge impact. And I think for me would be, I guess, as far as what changed for me, what my understanding and feeling towards family is, was the same and felt the same as we've gone through. But just as we've talked about, what changed for me was the importance of being able to stand up for the family, because seeing how it's being attacked and the way that it's going, the direction that it's going, how important it is for me to stand up for it and to say something. But that's still a hard thing for me, is being able, I don't know if I could be that one person to stand up. I think I'd be able to join a group and be able to fight for something, but it would be really hard to be that one person, to be the one that stands up to make the big difference, and that would I almost feel like that is like a purpose why, as far as religion speaking and our beliefs, people are called and born into the world for different purposes, and each person kind of have a reason. And I think that in Wilbur's, his life, his purpose was to be born and to be that one person to stand up for that belief. And I think we all have our reasons and our purposes for living, but we need to find out what that cause is and what it is that we need to fight for, and then be willing to fight for it.
I agree. I like that you mentioned that families, like your understanding of the importance of families didn't change. It just, like, for me, it just kind of grew. Like, I mean, I understand, like, families are central to Heavenly Father's plan for us, but throughout the semester, I just kind of realized how important families are and how important each person is in the family. And that, I mean, we can't, if we see something wrong, we can't just let it be wrong. We have to try to make a difference, because it's going to affect us and it's going to affect our families. So if you want the best for your family, you've got to be willing to make the changes that need to be made. I mean, I'm on the same page as you, Andrew. I don't know if I could be that one person that gets up and just is like, hey, that's not right, and then try and get all these other people to follow me. Like, I don't know, I'm just one person, but I feel like now if we see the opportunity to help and to make a difference, I feel more prepared to do so after taking this class. Instead of just being like, oh, hey, that's a good cause, I like that. Now I feel like I would actually contribute and be a substantial part of it, instead of just background character or one of the people who doesn't care,
Yeah.
What's the biggest thing that you took away from it, Jessica?
From this class, there were so many things, and then, because this is my major, marriage and family, and this class was different than most of them, because it actually showed me how to stand up and become an advocate, not being afraid to be that one person in the crowd, or to be the one that leaves during a movie because it's inappropriate, and turning off the TV because it's disintegrating the family, and it's showing family values that aren't true and that aren't right, that shouldn't be displayed. That the roles in the home are important, having a father and a mother in the home, and understanding that each parent is going to bring something different to the child to learn, like a father. Like, I asked my roommate, like, how to say it in a way that doesn't sound like, well, a guy can only teach this and a mother can like a father can only teach this and a mother can only teach this to a child. She's like, well, sometimes it's the father who does more disciplining, so a child learns a lot more discipline from a father, and then a mother, they learn a more nurturing sense. What did she say? Like how to love unconditionally type of thing. And it's true, like, sometimes a father can only teach this certain aspect to a child that a mother can't, and vice versa as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you had a son and you're trying to talk to him about, like, pornography or masturbation or something like that, I feel like it's more, not acceptable, but, like, he's going to understand more of that from his dad than his mom,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because boys are boys and girls are girls. I mean, we're equal, but that doesn't mean we're not different.
Yeah.
So some things it's just better for a mom to do, or better for a dad, or just men and women in general.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be willing to recognize where the opposite gender is going to be maybe a little bit more proficient than you would at that time, you know?
Mhm.
Okay, last question. Picture your spouse and children, current or future, and write down some thoughts about how they will benefit from you taking this class. Well, I think that, I mean, I mentioned a little bit earlier that now I just have kind of a deeper understanding of like God's plan for us. So I think that is going to help because it's going to allow me to be able to teach these principles and be able to answer questions. Like I've always been like worried that whenever I have kids that I'm not going to like know how to answer their questions, and I don't want to be, I don't even know what it was, but I read something the other day, and um, the this little girl asked her mom like, "Oh, how does rain happen?" You know, and then the mom was like, "Oh, that's just how God wants it." But then the dad was like, "Okay, yeah, that's true, but let me give you more." And so then he like taught her all about it. So I've always been worried that I'm gonna take kind of like the easy road or the shortcut, but I feel like after taking this class, that's not really acceptable anymore. Like you can't you can't be an advocate for anything if you're gonna cheat your way through it, you know. And
Mhm.
so things that are super important, like raising kids and like raising your family, you got to be willing to not take the shortcuts, and to not do that, you have to have the knowledge. And this class, I honestly think I have learned more in this class than in like all of my other classes combined. It's made such a like big difference. It's turned so many of my views totally around, and so because of that, I think that my family is definitely going to benefit because I've got the knowledge now to be able to help and make a difference.
For me, I put something. Sorry, let me find it. Um, I put a lot like learning. The principles of Christ within the class. We brought a lot of gospel doctrine into it, and something that a quote I heard in sacrament meeting when I was home in my singles ward was like not to follow the sophistries of Satan, and teach my children the principles of the gospel and say, yes, they may differ from the world, but as long as you remember these principles, you'll be okay. Like, be okay. It's okay to stand up for what you believe in and teach them what I know and not be scared that they may have an opposing view as I do, but being able to teach them something that's right.
I agree. That was one of the things that I just talked. What you just said, Jessica, was being able to teach them what's right and being an advocate yourself to your own family and teaching them those principles. And then by doing that, I think that has the biggest impact on them is being able to teach them those principles and then showing them the impact that they can have as they advocate for those causes for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I think other than that, if you guys don't have any, I mean, if you have any other comments, if we could do the little 2-minute. I don't know who's gonna. We never suggest who did the 2-minute review thing, and then I can close it up. I've got to skedaddle.
I don't think we
I
have to
feel
do
bad.
the 2-minute thing for this one.
Oh, we don't have to? Okay.
No.
I don't think so.
Okay, so I appreciate it. I'm gonna stop the broadcast right now, but don't leave for a second. Hold on.
Okay.